church family. It is so good to see you, or to be talking to you again, I should say, through whether you're on YouTube or Facebook or whatever medium you're enjoying this video from. I want to say a couple things. First of all, David has been doing a lot of work to get us set up so that we can kind of interact through this. And so he's gotten some equipment, and he's done a lot of hours of work in editing and putting these things together. So I just really want to thank him and let you know that he's doing that, and that you should express your gratitude to him for a lot of what's going on. We as a church, we're still in the middle of this coronavirus situation. We don't really have new information to give you on what's going on with that, although you can certainly, and I encourage you to be following the Bible Chapel on Facebook and on our website and getting all the updates there. One of the things that we want to do in this time, David has been taking a class, I believe, on church history. Is that right?
That is right, yeah.
Yeah, so David's getting his master's, if you didn't know that, and so that's something we're really excited about to see, or just to be able to be a part of. And this time, we're able to actually be the beneficiaries of this. So he actually said, "Hey, Nate, what do you think about doing a series on like heroes of our faith?" And I said, "Well, that'd be great, and tell me about that." So this is stuff that he has kind of put together, and it's based on a lot of the stuff that he's learning in school. And so we're excited to do that. So, David, tell me about this study on church history.
Yeah, so I wanted to do a couple of studies on particular figures in church history because I think they'll provide encouragement to the modern church, which is who we are, which is where we're at now, because it gives us the opportunity to look at key figures in the church's history. This can be like the apostles themselves, or early church fathers, or just theologians throughout Christianity's history. My goal for each video is to provide a quick summary of a particular man or woman who's had a big imprint on the church, but also we're interested in, if you have a specific person that you want us to cover, we would love to hear about that, because I think Nate and I would love to hear from you and just do studies that you guys would like to hear, or from people in church history. I think these are important for us to know, because Christianity isn't just a modern invention, right? It has over 2,000, almost 2,000 years of rich history of men and women doing amazing things for the gospel, following Jesus, bringing other people to Jesus, showing the hope that is in Jesus, and defending the most important things and beliefs of our faith. In a time where many people don't know the history of Christianity, I think it is important for us to sort of talk about these figures that are part of our history, because they're part of your faith, they're part of your history as a Christian. These men and women studying a lot of things and doing a lot of things and speaking and writing a lot of stuff for our benefit to know just the history of Christianity. So that's the purpose of these studies, and I'm really looking forward to doing them with us.
Cool. So, David, who are we starting with in our series? Who are we going to be talking about today?
So today we're going to be talking about Clement of Rome. There's another Clement. He is in Alexandria, but he lived 100 or 200 years after Clement of Rome. Clement of Rome, many historians say, was the first apostolic father of Christianity. And what I mean by apostolic father is it's just someone who personally knew one of the apostles, which were the disciples of Jesus. And so Clement was one of those people, and he is what many historians say is the first apostolic father.
So, what's significant about Clement's life, or what are the things that we should just kind of overview lessons from Clement's life that are good for us today?
It's a good question. Well, like I said, Clement is is the first apostolic father, and it's so cool to know that the Apostle Paul even mentions him in the book of Philippians. Paul writes to the Philippians in verse 3 of chapter 4. He says, "And I ask you, my true partner, to help these two women, for they worked hard with me in telling others the good news. They worked along Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are written in the book of life." So many people say that, is this Clement of Rome the person we're studying today, or was it just another Clement? And many historians say, no, this is the Clement that we're talking about today, because other church fathers like Irenaeus and Tertullian say, hey, this Clement was the one who was living alongside these apostles, and that he was doing the work with the apostles. Quick story, Clement was born in AD 35, which is around the time Jesus was crucified, and he lived and died around 99 AD or 101 AD. So he was in the thick of the New Testament being written and all of the early church stuff happening. Clement in Rome is most known for his letter to the Corinthian church, which is fascinating for us as a church, as the Bible Chapel, because we're going through study through the first letter to the Corinthians, the letter that Paul wrote. After that, though, Clement wrote a letter to the Corinthian church as well, and he's talked about some important things. By the end of the first century, the church in Corinth had removed all the leaders that the apostles had set up. They were basically saying, you know what, we don't really want to trust these leaders that the apostles set over us, and so we're going to do our own thing. It is a way to say that they didn't trust in the leadership of the apostles, which is fascinating because if you remember, Ron shared about this division that the Corinthian church was loving. They were embracing division rather than unity, and they were saying one follows Peter, one follows Paul, one follows Apollos. The other ones would say, no, I follow Christ. And so they're sort of going back to this same mode after the apostles' time had passed. And this is where Clement writes this letter to them. This letter was so important, in fact, that they would read scripture and then they would read his letter because it was so important. It's sort of like if you have a particular pastor or author that you like to listen to or read, you would read scripture and then you may read like one of these books. It's like a supplemental part. It's not to say that Clement's letter is on par with scripture, but it's supplemental to the fact of trusting in church leadership. It didn't compare to scripture, but it was so important and pivotal for the church in a time of uncertainty and oppression.
So when David said he wanted to study Clement of Rome, when he said he wanted to study Clement, I went and researched Clement of Alexandria, and then he told me, no, I want to do Clement of Rome.
Yeah.
So I actually went through, and I had never read his letter to the church in Corinth before, and so one of the things I noted was that, two things I noted. First of all was almost half of his letter is scripture citation. Mm-hmm. And so he'll make a point and then he'll go for what I'm used to, he goes way too much length citing scripture to support his point. And so that's an interesting thing that he relied on scripture so heavily.
Yeah.
The second thing that I noted was his emphasis on humility. And so he's talking to the church in Corinth, and as you remember how Ron has presented the city of Corinth, it's a very wealthy city. It's a very civilized sort of place. And what he does is he goes at great lengths to establish what Christian leadership, the qualities of Christian leadership, and how humility and not trying to be the first, not trying to be the greatest, not trying to be this ambitious sort of thing, but rather this role of humility, how that is so countercultural to the Corinthians. And I think it's countercultural for us today, but the way to get things done and the way to be a good leader is through this path of humility. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was just a great reminder of how opposite to the world's way of thinking our faith is. Mm-hmm. And so you can kind of understand the setting. You got a couple of humble Christian leaders in the church, and these upstarts come up and say, man, you shouldn't follow these guys. We're more impressive. We're smarter. We're better speakers. We've got it more together. And the church says, well, look, man, that they're right. And so they start to follow these guys. And so Clement, he actually gives a pretty scathing rebuke of that way of thinking. And so really emphasizes the importance of humility and leadership. It's really interesting.
Yeah, he talks about humility, and then also on the opposite side of that, he talks about the danger of division within the church. And also how love is the work that unifies us as the church. It's not a good speaker, it's not a great ministry, it's love. And as Nate shared and as Clement wrote, it's love from God, it's love from the Spirit that we first receive, and then we pour out to other people. So, final thoughts I have on Clement today is that there's not a whole lot of information on Clement, but what we do have is a lasting imprint of his work and his testimony. He delivered a much-needed message to the church at a time where they needed to hear it the most. Few disputed the authority of the apostles. All the other churches around the area were like, yeah, the apostles have full authority. They were chosen by Jesus and chosen by God to do this work. But the Corinthian church wasn't like that. It's so cool to know, well, maybe not cool, but it's interesting to note that like even in Paul and Peter's time, like they were still struggling with this battle of authority, and then they just continued to return back to it even after Paul and Peter had done the work of the apostleship and had passed away, and it was time for the next generation to rise up. But Clement played a pivotal role in unifying the church in a time of persecution and uncertainty. Without Clement's work, the church would not be unified, and they would just continue to have been divided. And when persecution and oppression would come, they wouldn't have any strength to stand on. And so Clement's work is so important for us today to know that even though we're divided and things are going on and it's uncertain right now and Christianity is being oppressed and faith is being oppressed in our culture, it's important to know that the church should be unified in love and not be divided by all these small things. Clement of Rome teaches us that the church, as the church, we're called to unity and love and not division. And in a time where many people are divided right now, it's super important for the church not to be divided. It's important for the church to stay unified in that love that we have received through Christ. It's important to know that the people of the church should be unified and submit under the leadership that God has given to them. But also, as Clement wrote, that leadership should be good stewards of the people that God has given them. And I think it's important for us as leaders of the church to steward those people well, as Clement would write. So in doing those things properly, I believe the church can be a beacon of light in the midst of darkness that we find our culture and our world in right now, not just because of the coronavirus, but just in general. And so Clement's work is important for us today to know that we're called to unity in love and not division.
Yeah, that's great, David. And I think it's a good word, even though we're not coming together here on Sunday mornings. And I do think there's an element of living in a broken world that it has interrupted our fellowship at a necessary level. So even though we're not together, we can still be unified, and we unified under our leadership, and still trusting in God in demonstrating that by the way we follow our leadership. So good words, David. Thank you so much for our quick recap and synopsis of the life of Clement of Rome.
Thanks, Nate.